So today I'm really happy to introduce to you Christina Agapakis, who's one of my favorite scientists on this campus. Absolutely. I'm a big fan. And she's been a fellow of the Art Science Center now for a couple of years. She comes to us from Harvard. She's a postdoc here. And this year was nominated as one of the upcoming women scientists by L'Oreal. And we saw pictures of her in New York dressed up with makeup. You wouldn't recognize her. I was so proud. So anyway, so that's my introduction. I'll pass it right away to Christina to talk a little bit about your background. This is a class of students from many different backgrounds, and a lot of them actually are science students. So they'll be interested to know, first of all, in our dialogues, why you find it interesting and perhaps important to work with artists, why you as a scientist were motivated or compelled to do an art show, and how that process informs your scientific process, and what you would recommend to students who study science or art in that relationship.
Be in between. All right. Well, I think I've talked to some of you already, and I see some people I know. And so who saw this on Thursday? A couple of you. All right. So I'm a biologist. My PhD is in biology and bioengineering. So I do a lot of work in this field called synthetic biology, where people are really interested in engineering novel organisms that go out into the world and do things in some way in industry. Some of you can't. I see you. We can work around.
Yeah, maybe you spread yourself.
But I was always interested in art, especially like in college. I took some art classes. I took architecture, sculpture, and drawing. But my focus was always in science, and it was hard to do both. And I didn't really see as much of a connection. There wasn't an awesome professor doing art and science. So where I went to college, there was no art and science center. It wasn't something that's sort of on my radar back then. So it was sort of like, oh, that's a thing that I like to do at home kind of thing. I never really saw that connection. And then as a graduate student in synthetic biology, a lot of people became really interested in the field, sort of wanting to ask questions of like, what happens when these kinds of engineered organisms end up in the world? How would it change our way of interacting with organisms? How does it change the way that we think about living things? How do we design things that are alive to be beautiful, to be like good in the world somehow? So there were a lot of artists that became really interested in sort of asking questions about synthetic biology in particular, and through meeting them, I realized that there was this whole world actually of artists and who had been very interested in biotechnology for a really long time, asking those kinds of questions and doing artworks and art exhibitions that really challenged the way that we think about engineering organisms and how biology is used in my research in my field. So that was really inspiring to me. I thought that was so important to see. Sort of like, using art as a way to like think about what the future is going to be and what kind of future that we want and what kinds of things we want to make. So that was really how I sort of came to art and began to see the real connections that we could have.
So maybe you can tell them a little bit about your crazy smell project.
Yeah. So the same artists who inspired me also inspired other synthetic biologists, who then got a grant from the NSF to do a residency program where they would be 6 pairs of researchers, one scientist and an artist. So people from science and engineering who deal with synthetic biology, and then people from art and design who had this interest maybe in biology and biotechnology. And so I was one of the science residents, and I was paired with a woman who's an odor artist. She works in Berlin, and she has a really interesting work that she does about having people think about smells in different ways and encounter smells in new circumstances. So she'll go to different cities, for example, and do sort of maps of cities by smell. So she'll go to different places and like get in alleys and smell things, and then like go to like a bakery and get like this like beautiful smells and terrible smells and sort of mix them up and sort of say that, you know, there's no good or bad smell. There's only thinking about smells and encountering places in new ways. And so one of her projects is also to do the smells of people's bodies. and
therefore the armpit picture.
I've used that armpit picture a lot.
And the armpit cheese?
Yeah, so our project, so we realized we wanted to deal with body odors because bacteria are really involved in how bodies smell because our bodies are covered in bacteria all the time. So we found a lot of really interesting connections between bacteria in the body and bacteria in cheese. So we made our own cheese using our own bacteria because we wanted to sort of show that they're all already kind of linked to each other, and then make people sort of. We wanted to ask questions about how bacteria were going to be part of our lives in the future. So like it was a synthetic biology project in that we were interested in the future of biotechnology that may be in this more like domesticated way, like in our cheese, on our bodies, in our home in different ways. So that was that project.
Cool. So then here we are.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little bit of a sense of your process, of how you started with the space, how you got inspired, and then how as a biologist you started thinking about it, and maybe artists who influenced your way of approaching it. Just give us a little bit of a run through.
Sure. So I guess I've been doing this project about body bacteria, and that's sort of been ongoing for a while. And now my lab that I'm in now here is Anne Hirsch's lab. If any of you are MCDB majors or like have taken any of the MCDB labs, she does a lot of the lab courses. But she's really interested in bacteria in the soil. So I've been working more in environmental microbiology. Trying to sort of see how bacteria influence larger, like global landscape sort of things. And then I went to a workshop out in the desert in Anza-Borrego. Have you ever been out there?
No.
It's so beautiful and so strange. Yeah. And then the workshop, part of the workshop, it involved like going out into the desert and getting lost and seeing different places. And the Salton Sea was one of the sort of destinations as part of the workshop. So the Salton Sea, who's been there? Have anyone been there? It's about 3 or 4 hours east of here, east and south.
I think we need to do a field trip there.
It's so amazing.
Yeah, it sounds crazy.
You haven't been?
I've never been.
Oh gosh.
I've heard about it. No, I've never been. I've heard about it, and then through this show, I just have to go. We all have to go.
Yeah.
It's a very strange and disturbing place for more reasons than one. And because I've worked so much with water and looking at the impact of environmentalism in water and how we relate to water, this project really touched me in a way that quite disturbing, I have to say. Even though it's aesthetically placed very nicely, by the time you go through the layers, you just go, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the sea. I would say like your work really did inspire me to think about water. No, I would say we're talking about artists, right? Like that, your sort of engagements with water have been really interesting, and using water as a way to like think about how we connect to the world in different ways. That whether that's sort of culturally or through industry, like or all of these systems. And I think that through the water, and then especially through the microbiology, I wanted to sort of pull apart the ways that we're connected to the Salton Sea, to this kind of environmental situation, and how the sea is this kind of really interesting way to think through issues of how nature and culture interact and intersect in really messy ways. So while I was there with a lot of anthropologists, which was really interesting, and sort of the most shocking thing when you reach the Salton Sea is that there are not that many people there, and the people who are there are very difficult to interact with. Like it's a strange place, and so the map. The map one up there, so like that's a sort of satellite image of the streets. If you're coming, the highway goes from the west east towards the Salton Sea. So the desert like city town in the Anza-Borrego is like from the west, and you come in, and then you see on the map like all of these streets which are in Salton City, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go to Salton City, maybe we'll get lunch or something, and then you realize like you see on the GPS, like on the car, right? Oh, we're in the city there's all of these roads, but there's no houses. There's nothing. There's very, very little bit there, and so that like immediately it's like shocking that
So where do people live?
There's very few people. There's very few houses where people do live, and then there's a few sort of more mobile homes around in different places.
Right.
And there's a lot of tourism too. Like there's a lot of people in RVs who will come out and park their RVs in the desert and sort of seeing the city in different ways. So like that was the sort of first shock. And then as you keep going, you hit the beach eventually, and you sort of are in the place where there used to be a yacht club, actually. Like it's called the Salton City Yacht Club, but there's nothing there. It's like a bunch, like some palm trees dead, like in various sort of states of decay, and then nothing. And we park in a parking lot, which used to be the parking lot for the yacht club, and then you get onto the beach, and then you realize that the beach also is not sand, but fish skeletons. So like the sea, has, maybe I should back up and zoom out a little bit. So the sea is in a basin, that whole region, so Death Valley, a lot of the region inland from here is all below sea level. And it was at one point covered with water from the Gulf of California. It connected all the way. And there was a lake there that would sort of rise and fall, that it would fill in, a flood, and then sort of dry up and go back to desert. And it sort of dried up the last time, I think, between 15 and 1600. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of irrigation happening from the Colorado River to get water into LA and to fill and to sort of develop a lot of the agriculture that's through that whole Central Valley. And there was an irrigation accident in 1905 that caused like all of this water to fill in that basin again, like a huge flood. I think it took 2 years of like constant flooding to fill it up again, make the lake. And so the lake sort of is an accident in a way, and an accident that is a result of these really interesting kinds of systems that bring water to us in LA that we have, which is in a desert. So we're in a desert, and there shouldn't be any water, but we have these amazing infrastructures that really move so much of the water to us.
And I think what's important to note for me listening and for the audience here is that the majority of us are actually not aware of what it takes to have water here in LA, because what Christina just said is true. We're in a desert, and the water is here artificially. So you can imagine in the future, this is almost like a microcosm of what could happen to LA. Mm-hmm. And if you add not only the issues with how you bring water here, the lack of consciousness of the use of water, and then all the oil industry, and possibly add to that some fracking, it could be an environmental disaster here. So to raise consciousness about it is so important, and to just even be aware of the fact that the water is not from here. It comes from Colorado, and it creates quite an environmental disaster. And it's something that's not sustainable. It's something that's got an end date, or we're going to be paying a lot of money, not only for drinking water, but for shower, for just regular use of water, right? Mm-hmm. But what's striking to me is the lack of consciousness about it. People just showering for hours, and just no sense of where this comes from and what the effect is and the price that we're paying, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the history is so fascinating too. Have you guys seen the movie Chinatown?
Yeah.
I really recommend it. It's a movie from the 70s, yes. I think, with Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway, about the early 1920, about early LA, and the power of the water people, how we brought water to LA is a really complicated history with a lot of. It's very interesting, and so it's an excellent film in general, and it's sort of it's this cool.
It was Faye Dunaway, right?
Yeah,
she was
great.
gorgeous.
Yeah, and then something.